welcome to Talk About. I'm your host, Jacqueline Yvonne, and with me today is writer, editor, Paul Weisser. Welcome, Paul, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you here today.
Thank you. I'm enjoying it.
You know, you have such an impressive background. Attended Cornell University studying literature and philosophy, and then from there went on to additional studies. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Oh my goodness, that could go on for half all by itself. Well, I thought for a brief period I wanted to be an attorney, so I went to Harvard Law School very briefly, and I decided that was not for me. Brought out too much of the aggressiveness in my verbosity, so I went back to literature and went to the University of Chicago. Got my master's degree in English there. And then I came out to Berkeley a long time ago, 1962, about 2 years before the free speech movement hit the fan. And Berkeley was a quiet little town, looked like Paris, had movie theaters right on Telegraph Avenue, and cafes, outdoors, people would mill around and have fun. It was a beautiful time.
Right, and so and from there you taught, I know you taught at the University of Berkeley for a while. Was it back then, or, because there's so many different things in between there, and I want to talk about some of that background as well.
Well, yeah, I was going for a Ph.D. in dramatic art, and I decided I just want to take a break from being a student for a while. A teacher actually out in Orinda, a high school drama teacher, got ulcers and needed a replacement to finish out the school year. So they called me and I went out to be interviewed. By the way, in those days you had to shave off your beard right away. I had one even then. And shaved it right off and went out to be interviewed and got the job. Made the mistake of I had to direct the senior play, and made this mistake of picking a play by Dylan Thomas called Under Milkwood, which is a beautiful play, but it happens to have 2 or 3 racy lines in it. Can I say what they were? Probably not. But
well, maybe not.
Maybe not. Actually, it's none of the 7 words that you can't pronounce.
Okay.
But anyway, I changed those, right? I changed those words, just those 2 or 3 lines, cleaned them up a little bit. But a mother went out and got the, I had these mimeograph. In those days, you used mimeograph machines. We didn't have Xeroxes back then. And gave out those copies of the script to the kids. But a mother went to the bookstore and got the real version of it, and she went to the Contra Costa Times, and there was a whole big minor free speech movement right there on the Miramonte campus. But it worked out beautifully. She apologized to me later in the newspaper and said it was a wonderful production and everything went well.
Fantastic. And I know that your background also included some production work, along with the theater work, production work, film. Just kind of explain how that went, because there's so much to your background that really gives you the credibility to do what you're doing today, which is the editing, and we're definitely going to talk about that. But let's talk about where did you get started first? Was it film? I know you ended up
actually
in
it was theater.
Okay,
it was theater. I got my Ph.D.
Okay.
in dramatic art at UC Berkeley. I went off and became a professor at UC Santa Barbara and taught for 2 years there. It was a very hot time. It was the year that the students burned down the Bank of America, as you may or not recall. And they shut down Route 101 and everything. It was the anti-Vietnam period. And then my first marriage dissolved, and I went off to Europe, thinking I'd be there for a few months just to get over the breakup. I wound up for 3.5 years. I worked for a film studio in Yugoslavia, what was then Yugoslavia, in Zagreb Films, it was called, in Croatia, the capital of Croatia, now a separate country. And then I worked for a year in London for 2 different film companies, one of which won an Academy Award for animation back then. And then I came back to America finally. It was about 3.5 years later, and it was a very hard time economically, very similar to this one, not quite as bad. Hard to break back into the economy. So I worked briefly for a film studio in Hollywood. And then they had hiatus period, which I'd never heard of, but it meant the last one in was the first one out.
And that was you, unfortunately.
And that was me.
Okay.
And then I kept in touch, and they gradually got rid of the whole department, actually. It was the sort of the brain center of that studio. And so I decided, well, why should I stay in Hollywood? I didn't especially enjoy LA. I'll go back where I enjoy being, and that was Berkeley, and I came back here. And that's when the editing happened.
And I lived in LA for years as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a good place to be poor, I can tell you that.
Well, no, that's true. So now you mentioned animation briefly.
Animated film,
What was that like, working with the
Oh,
animated
that was
films?
wonderful. The first year that I was in Zagreb, it was like living inside a Disney cartoon. It really was wonderful. In the morning, I would go with my girlfriend to the film studio, to the university, to learn the language, Serbo-Croatian. And then I'd spend the whole rest of the day at the film studio. And I had, while I was traveling around before I got there, I had written some short scripts, and they wanted to produce one of them, just a little movie, a short one. And they started feeding me work to do there. I would host people who would come from all over the world to the studio. We hosted an international animated film festival one year where people came from all over the world. And that's what got me to London, actually, because I met 2 film producers. Actually, 3. I almost worked on Watership Down, if you remember that movie about rabbits.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, almost worked on that. But I wound up working for 2 other film studios in London for about a year. And that's how that happened, the animation. Yeah.
So how many films have you actually worked on?
Oh my goodness, I couldn't begin to count them now. Because I worked in so many different capacities. I was a screenwriter on one, I might do titles on another, I might do promotional work on a third one. So, probably 20.
Wow. And so let's talk a bit about your editing, because that's basically where your focus is today.
It is.
And you do some writing yourself.
Well, very little did I do for myself. Now, I really enjoy enabling other people. I do my creative work in my sculpture, actually. So if you walk into my house, you can really step over something without tripping over a sculpture.
So that's our creative art talent as well.
Well, I've always loved sculpture since I was about 6. And my father was a dentist, so he was very much into his hands, and he passed that on to me. So that's a nice break from the words.
Right.
But my work is as an editor mostly, or a writer, or a rewriter, or a ghostwriter. It depends from one person to another.
So now in doing this, because I know in our talking earlier, and I read on your website, but in our talking earlier, I thought you had actually edited over 70 books, but you said now it's well over 100.
Oh, well, the 70 was for publishers directly, where the publisher would feed the book to me and I would edit the book in the old-fashioned way, pencil and paper, making marks, and then they would send it back to the author to respond to my changes.
So you've been doing editing for quite some time?
More than 30 years.
Okay.
So that was the old-fashioned way, pre-computer, really. And directly for the publisher. I hardly got to meet any of those authors because they were all over the world. I did meet a few. But then I started working with the authors directly, and that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, perhaps.
Okay.
Where the author comes to my home usually. Although now, opening up with the internet, I'm working with people all over the country. On Skype we have the audio and the video, and with a thing called VNC we have free screen sharing, so they can see my screen in their home or their office, 3,000 miles away. It's almost as good as sitting right next to me.
Right.
And so what I usually do, and I've adapted it to the Skype thing, is I read your book or story, whatever it may be, out loud to you. You may never have heard it read by anybody before but yourself. Usually that's very refreshing to people to hear their writing through another person's voice. And as I'm reading it, I'm asking questions, I'm making suggestions.
And are they're able to hear errors too, probably? That maybe not
the
necessarily.
Technical errors, you mean? Well, those I fix anyway.
Okay.
I'm just fixing those as we go, and I don't, some people are more interested than others in what the mechanics are that are involved in that. And some people want to save money and maybe not make as many mechanical errors the next time. Other people couldn't care less. They'll make the same errors for 5 years in a row, and I'll just keep, because I may get clients for a lifetime.
Right.
They'll come with a book or an article, and they may come back next time with the next book, or it may have been their doctoral dissertation, then they become a professor and they write books and articles, or it's a novel, or whatever it may be. And
so you're editing all types of genre?
Yes, both academic and creative work. Occasional business-oriented thing, but it's either a novel, a short story, screenplay on the creative side, occasional poetry, or academic type of work, either by professors or students.
I think I read children's stories.
Occasional children's story. I like that.
What is one of your proudest pieces, maybe that you've edited, or one of the toughest pieces?
Oh, well, proudest? Certainly one of the most interesting ones was a book called Birds Without Wings, which came out. The woman may be interviewed on TV shows like Oprah and so on. It's really a true story, very sad true story about herself.
I'm
She's
not
going to
familiar
come back
with that
with the prequel.
Yes,
Well, you know, most people think of books as bestsellers, but most books are not bestsellers.
So how do you consult a person? So what do you do? Take me through an editing process with a client.
Well, let's assume you came to my home, that you're right here in the Bay Area or as far away as maybe Sacramento or Palo Alto. People come from all over the Bay Area. And you come to my home, and we go upstairs to my office. Once you step over all those sculptures, and you may want to talk to me for a half hour, an hour, and give me some background about what your project is. And eventually we call it up on the screen, and I start reading it to you. I may take a few minutes to sort of homogenize it, as it were, to sort of do the things that the computer can do well, you know, the margins, getting out double spaces that are there, my mistake or whatever. You can make thousands of computer changes without having read a word of the manuscript. So we do all that, and then I start to read it. And depending on how well it's written, we stop a lot or we don't stop a lot. You know, if there's a lot of things I have questions about or suggestions to make, we stop a lot. And if it's beautifully written, we don't stop so much. And that's the first pass. So you want to do at least 2 passes on a manuscript, because the first time you're stopping for all those details and you're not reading it the way a reader would read it all the way through. So once you've cleaned that up, because of sort of what I call hacking my way through the jungle, as it were, we want to take our test drive and read it again. And then some people want more passes than that.
And because I know also in submitting work, there's proper formats. So I imagine you're helping them with the proper scripting and structure to submit it to book publishers. Now, do you also help agents? And do you help people with that?
More and more people go through agents. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Because the agents are the filters these days. The publishers, are, especially the big publishers, are less and less wanting to screen the manuscripts themselves. They let the agents do that. They don't pay for the agents. The agents get paid as a percentage of the authors.
Now, I also noted that you work with different cultures, different races, and I'm wondering, how do you apply what you do when it comes to editing something that's so culturally different than, say, your background? Do you do research or
I might have to. I might have to. But usually I let the author be my teacher.
Okay.
And I think of it as, in a way, as getting a Ph.D. in every subject that comes my way, whether it's a novel fiction or it's a nonfiction book. They are the authority on the subject matter, and they teach me. And it becomes part of my nervous system, as it were. And I don't see it as my job to impose my preferences on them, but to help them articulate what they're trying to say.
Now, of the individuals that you've actually personally worked with, have they all gone on to be published?
Oh, by no means. No. Well, first of all, there's the doctoral dissertations which don't get published. You get a Ph.D. at the end of that. Very few master's theses have done very few of those. A sprinkling. But the doctoral dissertations don't get published. Then you have the novels and the short stories, and some of those have been.
Right. Let's get your phone number in here. Give out your phone number so that we can make sure that people can contact you. What's your number there?
Yes, it's area code 510. 234-0095.
Why don't you say that one more time? And I'm
510-510-234-0095.
And email address?
Oh, I have a lot of those. I'd say the easiest one to remember is the Paul, P-A-U, with 5 L's, at AOL.com. P-A-U-L-L-L-L-L. That's what it took for me to get that name.
Okay.
When I tried one L, they turned me down, and I had to keep adding L's until I got it.
Right. Well, I think you, again, have a really colorful background, and I'm really pleased to have you here with us today, and our time is out. So I'd like to ask everyone to stay with us, because up next we do have Milo models. And so stay with us, and we'll be right back. And thank you very much, Paul, for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.